Hello there. Today I want to advocate for a new kind of practice in the reenactment entertainment type scene. So you see all of these people on the forums or the YouTube channels talking about historical accuracy. I would like to move for retirement of that term inside of these casual contexts. I'd like to see it replaced with historical plausibility. Now, my reason being that historical accuracy is a profoundly limiting concept. So on the one hand, it limits the available styles of recreations. If you go to a reenactment event, you're going to see a heck of a lot of recreations of, say, the Cherbourg? How the heck do you pronounce that? Cherbourg cuirass, right? Now, it's very likely that that cuirass didn't actually represent a style of cuirass. It might have represented a single example. And yet, you go to this reenactment event and there's 30 of them out there. So, one comparison I've heard is to, let's say archaeologists 1,000 years from now, they're excavating Canada and they find a Volvo station wagon, right? Now, they've found no other cars from Canada during this period, so what they're left with is, this is the only evidence we have of cars, right? So then all of the 21st century reenactors, they're all driving these Volvo station wagons, right? Because that's the only thing that historical accuracy will allow them to drive, right? Whereas in reality, you hardly ever see a Volvo station wagon anymore, right? So that's one example. Now, my other gripe with the historical accuracy is that it's an inachievable goal, right? It's not a goal. It's not a standard. It's an ideal to aspire toward. It's not something people actually achieve. So here's an example of what I'm talking about here. This is a sword I made a while back. Now, I forged this out myself using just a hammer, right? No power hammer. There was no, I use a coal forge. Now it's pattern welded. Right? It's made out of 15 bars that have been twisted together with 2 harder bars on the outside. It's all forge welded. I didn't use an arc welder for any of this. Right? A wooden handle, full through tang, alternating pieces. I mean, it's all a friction fit. This is constructed in the same way that swords of the period would have been. Now, despite all that, this is not a historically accurate sword. Right? Let's go into all the reasons why. So firstly, even though the shape is reminiscent of historical examples, and the dimensions are reminiscent of historical examples, those historical examples are from different pieces, right? There are swords that are as short as this, there are swords that are this weight and this kind of profile, but they're not the same one. This has got the dimensions of 4 or 5 different swords all put into one, okay? So it's not historically accurate on that count. The steel used is different from the historical steel, right? Historically, they would use wrought iron with varying levels of carbon content. This one's got modern spring steel, it's got modern mild steel, it's got modern carbon steel, it's got modern steel. Okay, so it's not historically accurate on that count. The handle is made from antler and walnut. Right? However, the antler that I used is from a white-tailed deer. Now, white-tailed deer do not exist in medieval Europe. The walnut here, it is from Canadian black walnut. Right? It is not European or English walnut or whatever. Right? So it's not historically accurate on that count. The copper rivets there, they're probably a different alloy than the historical. We go into more detail. Yeah, I forged it out with a hammer, but I used a coal forge. Historically, they would have used a charcoal forge, it leaves a different imprint on the steel, right? Different chemicals being burnt. I also used a modern anvil. I didn't use a medieval peg anvil. I also ground it with a belt sander. I didn't grind it out with a hand crank wheel. I don't even know if they had hand crank wheels in this period, but have you? I also didn't go through a 7-year apprenticeship. I went through a 1-year apprenticeship plus a bunch of working on my own. So I am not a historically accurate smith. I should have had the proper full education, because this has got some flaws that the historical example might not have had, right? I also built this with modern knowledge because, I can look up on the internet a whole bunch of different pictures of swords, whereas the historical guy, he can't do that. So you can see how each one of these reasons just makes it more and more restrictive. So to the point where I cannot make a historically accurate sword. And for that matter, neither can you. Neither can the finest smith in the world, because even if you get all of the materials right, even if you get everything right, just down to a T, historical accuracy it's not a standard, it's an ideal. Now, even if you took a historical example, so even if this were an artifact that I'd found, it would still not be historically accurate, because a historical person, he wouldn't be using a 1,000-year-old sword or whatever. He'd be using one that was made a couple of years ago. So, right, even historical examples aren't historically accurate. So, is that really such a useful thing to hold everybody to? Now, what this sword is historically plausible. Right? If you took this back in time, nobody would look at it and go, "Huh, what the heck is that?" Right? They'd think, "Okay, that's a sword. It's quite nice looking, and it's a little bit, oh, but it's got some flaws in it. Okay." People just look at it and think it's a middle-tier sword, even though it's very different from any historical example, right? It's within all of the parameters, though. That's historical plausibility. So, if you look at one of the bows that I've made, these are very different from historical examples. Now, the reason being that the wood has its own characteristics. If I try and make a bow replicating this specific example that I saw in a museum somewhere, the wood has got other plans. So I need to start with a piece of wood that is identical to that one that's in the museum, and I won't know that until I start cutting into it. So, do you think the historical person actually cared about that stuff? No. Okay, I got this piece of wood that I cured for over a year, and I can't make the perfect bow out of it. Okay, well, into the fire it goes. No, I cured this piece of wood for over a year. I'm going to make a bloody bow out of it, and if it's not perfect, it's not perfect, right? All that matters is that it shoots. I talked about this in my leatherworking video. If you're working with deer skins, you're not working with the same material every time. Every deer skin is different, right? Okay, so you're making yourself a pair of leggings for winter. Do you want one that matches the regional style perfectly? Well, you don't have enough skin for that, so you can either have leggings that don't quite match the regional style, or you can go through winter with no leggings at all, right? So rather than trying to slavishly try and reproduce like the aesthetics, the manufacturing techniques, and the style of the times, right? Rather than trying to make a Peterson type 12 or whatever, try and make a sword that would fit in the period, something that nobody would comment on, right? There's nothing about this sword that anybody would think is obviously wrong. It's just the internet pedants who would find problems with this. Oh, it's not made of historical steel, right? So on and so forth. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today, so bye-bye.